I've always been a little fond of the Dead Island games. Yes, that one viral advertisement set it up to never quite meet expectations, but the brutal, gory, scrappy gameplay always stood out to me. As a series, it's been consistently mindless, but in a way that feels quite nice to just throw a podcast on in the background. Dead Island 2 never felt like a game I'd line up at midnight for or get installed for day one, but it did feel like a no-brainer, pun intended, to pick up once it hit the bargain bin. The state of physical media being what it is, that bargain bin came in the form of the game being bundled into my PlayStation Plus Premium subscription. Despite playing it virtually free of charge, I'm only partially convinced that Dead Island 2 cleared the pretty low bar I'd set for it ahead of time. While it gets plenty of things right in a technical sense, Dead Island 2 feels so utterly sauceless, dry, devoid of flavour, wholly and absolutely lacking in sauce. Here's why. First, I'd like to acknowledge it's a mini miracle that this game even launched, and getting out of seemingly almost a decade's worth of development hell is impressive in its own right. Techland, the team behind Dead Island and Dead Island Riptide, was originally set to lead the game but stepped away to work on Dying Light, which is the best zombie game they've ever worked on. Since its first announcement, 4 studios have worked on the game, but it was Dambuster Studios that finally managed to get out of the door in early 2023. Though the game has been in development in a technical sense since 2014 or 2013, it seems that Dambuster as a team worked on it for just 4. This is seemingly still longer than the first 2 Dead Island games were in development for, but the timeline doesn't feel quite as unrealistic now. Dambuster's previous releases include the pretty awful Homefront: The Revolution and Chorus, which I actually haven't played. Though I can't speak to the quality of the latter, Dead Island 2 is much better than the former. I think the cultural outlook on Dead Island 2 wasn't exactly optimistic before its launch. A game being in development hell is a worrying sign, and the studio behind the original games went off and made something better and more consistent. And then also, the game's 4th major development team had yet to prove themselves in a project this big. Dead Island 2 is not as bad as that development history might have you believe, but it's just not really that good. A brighter, more ironic and wilder take on the series, Dead Island 2 is an attempt at what Saints Row 2 did to the GTA-soaked streets of the first game. With a handful of survivors to choose from, Dead Island 2 seats you in a plane after a zombie outbreak takes over LA, or LA. When that plane is shot down for accidentally housing the affected, you have to help a band of survivors get out of the infested lockdown you found yourself in. This involves meeting up with Sam B, who is de facto sort of the main character of the entire Dead Island series, finding himself in all mainline games, Dead Island Survivors, and even Dead Island Epidemic, which is a mobile game that shut down in less than a year, rest in peace. It's a neat way of rewarding the player for knowing the series, and the game's super ironic and detached shell lets it away with finding Sam B once more. In a more grounded tale, Sam B being, well, everywhere during every outbreak would be a smoking gun, indicating that he's the big bad behind it all, but it's treated with just enough irreverence to sort of work. He clearly has history with Emma John, an actor who allows you to hide out at her house, and this is one of the driving points of the narrative. Jaded and getting on in age, he wants to simply wait the whole thing out with the supplies in Emma's house. You, or I, or well, Danny, the Irish girl I chose to play as, needs the story to progress and thinks her zombie immunity is her key to getting out of the city. Being a roller derby racer, she has high stamina and health, yet low recovery. I mostly just chose her so me and my partner can see how authentic her Irish accent and phrases are. Though it's sometimes quite random, the Irishness of the phrases are charming, if a little ham-fisted. Once again, the ironic callbacks to the luck of the Irish or her mum's stew only really get by because of how far Dead Island's tongue is shoved into its own cheek. However, this tone can also lead to its worst moments. Danny, as this stubborn protagonist set and going her own way, regardless of the world around her, can make her feel detached from the story, and the likes of Emma John isn't just a random character, it's a reason to lampoon celebrity culture and famous people. However, saying rich people are full of themselves in an ironic way without any sincere critique falls flat in 2024, or should I say 2023. See, the problem is, it never does any of these jokes to the degree that would even best This Is the End in 2013, which was an okay comedy at best. Part of the problem here is that irony doesn't need to mean detached. Parody doesn't mean you can't engage in genuine critique. In fact, it's a great way to do so. Dead Island 2 often goes for gut punch moments of human depravity, like an army warrant officer saying you aren't fit for army combat because you empathize with the bodies you kill too much. This could linger. Or better yet, be an unspoken rule of that regiment without the NPC being cartoonishly evil. Yet, Danny gives some sort of, well, feck yeah anyway response and continues trading resources with them. The stakes of this world are confined by its need to be comfortable and, well, Dead Island, so it never pushes that boat out any further. Dying Light's most brutal and miserable moments feel earned because they sit and they stew. You are forced to acknowledge it in somber ways. Of course, you don't need to be somber to feel the weight of this, but Dead Island 2 is neither funny nor sincere enough to make these points feel like any more than a pithy retort. It's easy to feel like the game thinks it's above all this, and then you're off to do your third fetch quest. Not every mission is as simple, of course, and there are self-guided quests where you have to find parts of a story, piece it together, and find a missing person or hidden object, but the game's sickly tone only makes them feel tedious. I love self-guided missions, but these tend to feel closer to a mission quota in a game, with tons of micro areas and reasons to backtrack, rather than a deeper exploration of the world or its story. To bring it back to Dying Light, the game's prettier, smarter older sister whose shadow it lives in, there are plenty of goofy Easter eggs and wacky jokes in this, but the payoff is big or brutal enough to reward you for trying to organically figure it out. Even secret areas that aren't part of a quest often have the environmental storytelling to reward you, yet Dead Island 2 makes them feel like a notch in a belt, just another rung in getting that platinum. With a limited inventory and pretty much all quests giving you a lightly upgraded weapon, it's never worth that extra 30 minutes to get a few more points of damage. I feel the same about the game's progression systems. Levels can be earned with experience through killing baddies and finishing quests, as well as giving you a buff to stamina and health. These give you cards which can be equipped to make a build. This is a smart way of doing away with granular level up screens with minor bonuses to a percentage of a stat. However, it somehow falls into the same trap of making most of these skills feel fairly superfluous. Suddenly, after a level up, you might get a minor boost to damage when doing a certain skill. The game is bombastic and filled with jokes, yet the wackiest move you can do is a dropkick that you unlock in the first hour. That said, this dropkick is genuinely fun and can be used to tactically fling zombies into fire, pits of electricity, and acid, which can be pretty nice in slow motion. As well as this, you can maim limbs with weaponry, and this can feel great with a big heavy hammer, especially when you're swinging your body to hit multiple zombies in a single fell swoop. In a way, it reminds me of playing Chivalry 2, but like managing to actually kill your opponent. Despite its tone, the game can be genuinely quite spooky and has some good art. The skill cards are fitting, and murals around the city look occasionally fantastic. Like the semi-iconic Dead Island 2 trailer with Jack Black impersonator from 2014 shows, this game knows how to sell itself. It does a good job at giving individual moments that are clippable with jump scares and reveals. In zombie bite-sized chunks it can work, but it's draining for the 30 or so hours I spent on it. I think this is true of the series as a whole. That first trailer from Dead Island 1 sets up an emotional core of a family trying to battle the infection whilst their child turns in front of their eyes. Playing the entire trailer backwards is a great artistic decision that gives the story this horrifying dramatic irony where you know what's coming and have to watch anyway. This is frankly one of the best video game trailers of all time, not just for its obvious quality, but for how iconic it is and how wonderfully it manages to make yet another zombie game in the 2000s actually seem interesting. The way the world turns dark the moment the daughter crashes through the glass in stark contrast to the resort they arrived at, the genuine look of shock on the mother's face, the way her eyes look almost human in death. Then you see the logo for the game, which is just as striking and evocative. This perception of a deeply moving and grounded game is smashed away when Sambi comes on screen, wiping down hundreds of zombies by himself without even breaking a sweat. The Dead Island 2 trailer feels more honest with what the game is, and I think Dead Island 2 is better in a technical quality sense than the first two, yet it can't get by on just that shock alone anymore. Like Borderlands 3, part of the problem here is the dev team having hubris to just do what worked a decade ago, but with a shiny new veneer. This isn't to say the game doesn't do things I like. Much of the houses and the loot system feel copy-pasted, but some parts of the storytelling I do enjoy. For instance, Emma Jaunt was in a PR marriage pre-Outbreak. Being rich and powerful, her husband sort of gets whatever he likes, and he pays to get onto the flight you found yourself on at the start. He was the original infected on that flight and the reason it crashed. This isn't just some passenger, there's some effort put into explaining why things happen, and this not only does that, but it gives you an interesting character study of a few different characters. As a result of this, Emma has cheated her way on board through her privilege and doesn't care when he dies. She does care for you and her PA though, two people who seem to be earnestly trying to help. These characters often do very goofy things, and they seem there purely to drive the story or make you laugh. Like there's a moment with Sanby where he tells you the only way to get through to the next destination is through the sewers, and that's because he did it. But he only did it that way previously because that's what he did in Dead Island 1. So this game is cheekily pointing out what it did before and just saying, do it again because you did it before. The whole game feels cyclical in this way, but can benefit from it too. For instance, the main character almost always asks survivors if they need escorting back to a safe house, and they always turn her down, almost intentionally subverting the escort mission trope. The game even directly makes fun of Sanby's showboating and confidence, almost that the game is saying, get a load of this guy, about the guy they wrote. It's kind of bizarre and not helped by the fact that it happens in the sewers to a gentleman who's obsessed with Emma Jaunt and willing to help you out purely because you are the one person on Earth stranded with the one actress he's obsessed with, who just so happens to have lived nearby pre-apocalypse. There's this constant self-aware tension that makes Dead Island 2 feel very unlikable. Its self-deprecation feels less like bringing itself down to earth and more like it's insecure of its own presence. The story, as a result, flits between the goofiest moments in Resident Evil to, well, the slightly less goofy moments in Resident Evil. Resident Evil mostly gets away with it because the quality of the world and its willingness to commit to that B-movie charm is just so likeable. It doesn't feel above it, and in fact kind of revels in it. Being immune in Dead Island 2, you develop zombie superpowers and a psychic link, and scientific jargon justifies what is essentially our antagonist, but also some zombies are brutish because they took steroids, which you can then exploit and learn, but not from others. It tries to make you feel inquisitive by learning how these zombies operate, but only from far enough away that you can't see the magician's hand slipping that card into his sleeve. This same philosophy applies to the story. Everything is set up for something big and flashy, yet they've already sold you the season pass and can't exactly end the game in a state where you can't go back and farm that platinum. Instead, you are left in a very similar position, having finished the game, as you would the second last mission. The ending is deflating and shallow, with a few winks and nudges at the camera like your third Marvel post-credits scene. Instead of being amused that Glorp Shitter has made a triumphant return, I find myself hoping it would end so I could go to the metaphorical bathroom while the credits rolled. It took almost a decade for this game to actually launch, yet somehow the guts of the story isn't even solved. See, I don't necessarily think all games need to wrap things up in a pretty bow. It doesn't need to hand everything to me, but something of substance would be nice. Not only does this feel like it disregards my time spent with the game, but it feels like it disrespects me for it, laughing in my face for the tens of hours I've spent in hell. I get the name now. There is a way this game could do the same thing, and could be adored for being off-putting and punky, but it's not. The game is too desperate for you to like it. It wants you to feel the nostalgia of playing that first game and offer a slightly revised version of the game we got a decade ago. There's something interesting here, but the game is too pathetic to ever bear its fangs, and that leaves it feeling insipid and tactless. Goodbye, Dead Island. I won't be using that return ticket. Thank you so much for watching my video on Dead Island 2. I wasn't really expecting to put a video together on this, I just happened to play it because it was on PlayStation Plus, and then I had lots of feelings about it, and I thought, what better way to express them than shout them into the void that is the internet at large. If you liked my video or my channel, please do subscribe and like the video. All those metrics probably help. I don't know how to read these things, but I'm happy to see likes every now and then. That always is good, I guess. But genuinely, I'm very appreciative of people checking out the channel and giving it a watch. If you liked and you've already liked this or subscribed and you want to show a friend, that would also be very cool, just to, get that little subscriber figure just a little higher. Anyway, thank you so much for watching.